Members, good morning. Can I just double check, please, before we go live, that everyone has got their agenda pack open? So we're referring to that. But also you've seen the email from Dan Snowden that includes the documents that were published on the website for the July report and also the February report. So we're all referring to the same page numbers. I don't know. No, so it's the report document. So when we're talking about the officer reports, we're all looking at the same documents. What I'm mindful of is I don't want us using different ones, old ones, which have different page numbers. Otherwise, we're going to get very confused. But just to clarify, to make sure everyone had the right ones, in addition to your agenda pack, Dan has made sure that he's emailed those. So we're all working from the same documents. It's only when we start using page numbers, I want to make sure we're all looking at the same thing if possible before we go live. Thank you. Just to clarify, they're the ones that can't be redacted. So they're the ones that we've circulated on each of the previous committees that shows exactly what people have said that haven't been published on the website. So it's your local residents and some of the local groups.
10 a.m. people are going to get started now, please. Can you let us know when we're live, Dan? Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Cambridgeshire County Council's Planning Committee. My name's Councillor Henry Batchelor, and I'm the chair of the committee. Before we get to the main business, we have to run through a bit of housekeeping. So do bear with us while we get through that. And that starts with me handing over to our Democratic Services Officer, Dan Snowden, to let us know the notification of the chair and vice chair for this municipal year.
Thank you, Chair. This is for the committee to note the appointment of Councillor Batchelor and Councillor Ray as Chair and Vice Chair of Planning Committee for the municipal year.
Thank you. So we can carry on then, can we? Good, thank you. Still with you, Dan, item number 2, apologies for absence.
I've received apologies from Councillors Connor and Prentice substituting, Gardner and Gough, and Councillor Murphy substituting for Councillor Gough.
Great, thank you very much. We move on to then item number, still on item number 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare regarding any items of business on the agenda? No, okay. So we'll move on then to item number 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. So can those members who were here, please let me know if there's any amendments or mistakes in the minutes that we would like to have changed? No, can't see any. So we will take those as a correct record. Do we need to take a vote on that, Dan? Okay, I will sign those at the end of the meeting. Thank you. Okay. Well, with that then, we move on to the substantive business we have on the agendas again in front of us today, which is looking at the travel hub at the land northwest of Hawkston Road. Introducing this to us, I'm sure she's getting quite tired of doing so now, is Dallas Owen, who's the planning officer. We do also have other officers supporting the committee today, who are David Allett, who's the Assistant Director, Transport Strategy and Network Management, Cheryl French, the Assistant Director, Climate Change and Energy Services, Jez Tuttle, the Transport Assessment Manager, and Rachel Jones, who's the Business Manager of the Planning Department, and she's joining us remotely. Before I ask Dallas to kick us off, though, I do need to ask Councillors Prentice and Murphy, as they haven't sat on this committee before when this item has been before us the last 2 times, if they feel they are up to speed, given the fact that all other members have gone through this in quite a lot of detail over 2 previous meetings. So, Councillor Prentice, are you content to continue?
Absolutely fine, Chair. I've read everything that's been sent to me, and I'm comfortable that I'm up to speed with things.
Superb, thank you. And Councillor Murphy?
Thank you. Likewise, I read everything referred to in the helpful summary and watched the videos as well.
Good, thank you very much. So, Dallas, I think we're over to you to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. The proposal before you is a Regulation 3 application, in summary, for a proposed travel hub to include car parking, cycle, coach and horse parking, travel hub building, PV panels, infrastructure improvements, a new dedicated busway, a new shared use path, including new bridge across the M11. For consistency, the presentation consists of all the slides that have previously been shared. Why is that not moving? Excuse me, sorry. So this application is where the star is there. And this is the wider area, includes the M11 and the Junction 11 directory, Trumpington Park and Ride, the existing one here, Trumpington Meadows Country Park over here, Rivers Cam and the Rivers Granta, and also the Cambridge A10 road and the Hawkston Road A1309. This is a new slide, and this just shows you the green belt overlaid on the previous slide, and you will see here that it covers part of the existing Trumpington Ride site. This is the site location in red,
And this is where the highways improvements up to the existing Trumpington Park and Ride, and land within the blue is within the same ownership. This plan is the general arrangement plan, and the proposed development is explained in more detail in section 4 of the report and section 3 of the 29th of July 2021 report. But basically, essentially, it covers 2,150 parking spaces, and the new bridge is next to the existing bridge and the dedicated bus route. This is the proposed non-motorised shared user bridge. This is the travel hub. This is the travel hub building. These are examples of the lighting columns and the solar canopies. This is the covered way sheltered waiting areas. This is the landscaping proposals, again, that provides biodiversity net gain and is discussed at paragraphs 9.57 to 9.68 of the 29th of July report, and at paragraphs 5.43 to 5.61 of the 24th of February report. This shows the swale bridges, examples of such, and their locations throughout the park and ride. This shows constraints. So the light green is the green belt. The listed milestones listed in the 29th of July report are in red. Trumpington Park and Trumpington Country Parks, excuse me, in dark green. Development that's currently under construction here. This shows the agricultural land classification, and this is discussed at paragraphs 9.68 to 9.71 of the July report. Aerial photographs showing the site in the corner here over the Trumpington meadows. Again, there's a further distance view. This is a view of the transport route would go parallel with the existing M11. This is a view from the user bridge of the site. This is the north landing end of the proposed shared user bridge. And this is the River Cam location of outfall, which is mentioned in the 29th of July 2021 report. So to recap, the reasons for a deferral as set out in paragraph 1.2 of the officer report and listed below are the issues to be discussed today. Inappropriate development on the Greenbelt, location not demonstrated as essential, as there were other potential locations not within the Greenbelt. The application was contrary to Greenbelt policy, as no very special circumstances for development have been demonstrated. The solar carports constituted inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. Demand levels for the travel hub did not demonstrate the need for the inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. The development was unsustainable, and climate change issues as set out be explored, and why Trumpington Park and Ride was not a valid alternative option. As members are aware, the application has been deferred twice. I stress that all three committee reports have teased out information that is within the original submission documents and were highlighted and clarification provided by the applicant within the post-committee responses. The application was last presented to the Planning Committee on the 24th of February 2022, whereby the motion was passed unanimously to defer the item for further information on the following. The first one, inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, location not demonstrated as essential. This is dealt with in full at paragraphs 8.1 to 8.12 in the summary. And in summary, they are: the need for additional travel hub capacity along the Royston to Cambridge corridor was identified and justified in the Cambridgeshire Local Transport Plan 2011 to 2031. The transport strategy for Cambridgeshire and South Cambridgeshire, which was undertaken to support the wider planning proposals and allocations in these areas and in the combined authority local transport plan. Site options for the travel hub are constrained to available sites within the vicinity of junction 11 of the M11, because the intention of the scheme is to ease congestion into Cambridge and reduce journey times and the number of cars travelling to both the city centre and to the biomedical campus by easing pressure on the existing Trumpington Park and Ride facility and to reduce traffic flow through the M11 Junction 11. The expansion of the existing Park and Ride and facility at Trumpington was not an option because the only feasible way of increasing the capacity of the site would be by decking the parking, resulting in a multi-storey facility. Detailed work was undertaken to assess the potential for the expansion of the existing Park and Ride site. However, there are a number of disadvantages and constraints with this approach, which are set out in paragraph 8.7 of the report. The application was contrary to Greenbelt policy and no very special circumstances of development have been demonstrated. At paragraphs 8.13 to 8.19, and in summary, they are: the site options are shown on page 36 of the agenda report. These were the only options that met the criteria required for the level of demand that would demonstrate the justification for the travel hub, and they all required a Greenbelt location. Consideration of the Greenbelt in the planning balance is considered to be a strong material consideration when balancing the merits or otherwise of the planning application. Even allowing for a change in travel behaviours following the COVID-19 pandemic, the transport need case forms part of the planning balance for the very special circumstances for development within the Greenbelt. A local transport infrastructure proposal, which is identified in the NPPF as one of very limited number of developments which can be considered as not inappropriate development within the Greenbelt, having regard to paragraph 150 of the NPPF, provided they preserve its openness and do not conflict with the purposes of including land within it. The next reason for deferral: demand levels for the travel hub did not demonstrate the need for the inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. At paragraphs 8.29 to 8.43 in the report, and in summary they are: with regard to demand levels within chapter 2 of the post 24th February 2022 Planning Committee response document prepared by Mott MacDonald, providing further clarification for the justification of the scheme, there are two sections. 2.1, the park and ride demand is discussed, and at 2.2, the number of parking spaces for the proposed South West Travel Hub is discussed, which considers development proposals of both housing and employment in the area. The estimation for demand and the required number of spaces for the proposed South West Travel Hub have been calculated using the Cambridge sub-regional model. The results from this modelling exercise indicates that 2,500 spaces will be needed by 2036. This is based upon planned future housing and employment developments, particularly at the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. Therefore, it is likely that the need for spaces will not significantly alter. The modelling converts residential developments into population growth. And the key findings are that the internal Cambridge zone's growth from 2015 to 2026 is 15.6%. And the Addenbrooke's zone, including the Cambridge Biomedical Campus growth within the same period, is 89.7%. Also within the post 24th February Planning Committee response document, it discusses the importance of the M11 Junction 11 as a gateway for journeys to the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. The document stresses that the South West Travel Hub will help minimise congestion at this junction and into Cambridge city centre by removing traffic from the M11 before it reaches the A1309, improving connectivity to and from the South West Cambridge, thereby helping achieve the objectives of the city deal. Going to the next reasons: the solar carports constituted inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, and the development was unsustainable, and climate change issues as set out be explored. The detailed climate change calculations provided by Climate Change and Energy Service can be found at paragraph 6.2 of the report, and they do not object to the proposal. They highlight that the South West Travel Hub sits as one part of a wider transport strategy. It is designed to intervene car journeys on the road network, to reduce car mileage and support electric vehicles through the provision of EV charging points supplied by green electricity from solar PV. Although the PV panels are not a form of development which falls within the category of not inappropriate development within the Greenbelt, as defined within the NPPF, and so very special circumstances are normally required in respect of PV panels. However, They do form an ancillary part of a transport infrastructure scheme. The provision for the PV panels will have some impact on the openness of the green belt within the context of the wider travel hub scheme, and there will be a reduction in carbon emissions through minimisation of use of electricity from the national grid in accordance with the Council's climate change and environment strategy. Once the scheme is designed, an update carbon assessment is provided, and also that potential ways to reduce construction emissions might include the choice of materials, designed to use less material where possible, reducing construction transport to sites, using electric or alternative fueled construction plant where available. It is important to note the travel hub is not designed to generate new car trips. New trips are generated by growth in commercial and residential use classes. Trips to and from the site would already be on the network, either existing trips or future ones driven by growth in and around Cambridge. The focus is therefore reducing car mileage, and this effect will be compounded by wider policy interventions. These are the only issues for discussion today. The contents of the report before you are to be considered alongside the original officer report dated 29th July 2021, in addition to the addendum report dated 24th February 2022, provided within your agenda pack. There are no statutory objections to the proposal. However, representations have been received after the report has been published, and these have been shared with you. With regard to the government's white paper for levelling up, as referenced in the letter from the CPRE, specifically relating to growth of research and development within the Cambridgeshire area, it is acknowledged that this is a future aspiration of the government and is not yet embedded in policy. However, the proposal before members should be considered against the current national planning policy framework and policies within the local plans as discussed at Section 8 of the 29th July 2021 report, Section 4 of the 24th February 2020 report, and Section 7 of the 15th of June report before you. In conclusion, on 24th May 2020, a new draft consultation version of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authorities Local Transport and Connectivity Plan has been published, and it identifies that the Cambridge South West Travel Hub in the vicinity of the M11, A10 is still considered to be a key aspect of the strategic vision for the area. The South West Travel Hub is one of a number of schemes still required to sustainably deliver the planned growth proposed within the current local plans for Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. On the basis that there are no statutory objections and that the applicant has addressed all the reasons for deferral, there are no material planning reasons to refuse the application, and the recommendation is for approval, subject to the matter being referred to the Secretary of State for further consideration and the application not being called in. To determine the application in accordance with Section 10 of the addendum report, Section 11 of the 29th July 2020 report, and Section 7 of the 24th February 2020 report. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dallas. As usual, very thorough introduction to the item. Members, before we move to public speakers, I'm going to offer the opportunity to ask any questions of clarity from Dallas, or equally any of our specialist officers that we have supporting the committee as well today. Members, do we have any questions of clarification at this stage for any officers? Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the thorough report, and I may have missed this, but do you have a size, sort of in acres, how big this area will take out the green belt? Because it looks like quite a sizable area. Apologies if I've missed it. Basically, there was that, and also this is obviously going to have a visual impact on neighbouring communities, I'd have thought, sort of for far and wide. Has that been taken into account?
Okay. So in the 29th of July 2021 report at paragraph 2.1, sorry, I'm turning.
I did say apologies if I'd missed it, but you know.
So in the July 2021 report at paragraph 2.1, it states the total red line area extends to approximately 46.65 hectares, which is approximately 115.3 acres.
Right, so that's quite a sizable area.
Oh, sorry, and to take account of all the associated works and highway routes and upgrades proposed as part of this planning application, of which the travel hub site itself equates to approximately 29.5 hectares, which is approximately 73 acres.
So we're talking just over 200 acres being used up for this, right? Thank you.
Sorry, can I just come back in on that? So what we were just trying to explain is if you take the whole red line area, which was what was shown on the slide, that would be, if I put it in acres for you, because that's what you've asked for, that would be a total of 115.3 acres. That's the whole red line. But when you talk about the travel hub itself, and the travel hub itself is in the green belt, that's approximately 73 acres. So it's distinguishing, it's not adding to it, it's kind of bringing it down for you.
All right, my apologies. Yep, I added the two together. Thank you. The visual impact, has that been considered? The visual impact on neighbouring local areas?
That was considered in the 29th of July 2021 report, and that isn't why we're here today, because that wasn't one of the reasons for deferral.
Right, that's fair enough. Basically, it does mention about sort of traffic on neighbouring communities. I am going to mention that whether I can or can't, because, you know, they are very important. So has that been taken care of?
It has, yes. It has been considered by the transport assessment team.
Right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any further questions of clarity before we move to our public speakers? Sorry, Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, could I just ask a question about the recommendation of an updated carbon assessment of the total change in emissions from user utilisation of the scheme shall be undertaken? That's on page 51 of our papers today. I'm just wondering when that assessment would take place and what sort of impact it would have once it was done.
So there's a revised condition, if you see at section 10 of the report, and there's implementation of the low emission strategy, and there's also which requires for ways to deal with the embodied carbon emissions.
So I think just to answer your question, because when this has been looked at, we have to look at it from a planning policy point of view, and what the policy is requiring is what the applicant has actually already submitted. What has usefully taken place, however, and this is where Cheryl French may want to come into the conversation from the climate change perspective, is whilst acknowledging that the applicant has met the planning policy side and everything is meant from a planning perspective, what they have asked to do is for an updated carbon assessment to take place. That would be if you are minded to grant, and also that the Secretary of State is minded not to call it in for a decision. That would actually come before development takes place, but it needs to be assessed based on detailed design. So what we've got at the moment is all the kind of main information to allow us or allow members to make a decision today, but that effectively would come in and try and ensure that as much as possible is taking place to look at those types of materials, because what you've seen from the report is the greatest amount is actually at the build out. So actually any opportunity to reduce that would be beneficial. But I'm sure I'll bring Cheryl in now, because it was her team that actually looked at this, and she can just confirm that that will be, should planning permission be granted.
Thanks, Emma. And yes, the carbon assessment isn't a material planning consideration here. So we had the opportunity to talk to the consultants working on the project to look at their carbon assessments. And we broke down the carbon assessment into 3 areas. We looked at the embodied, so what happens during construction. And then we looked at what happens once it's constructed, if it goes ahead, what that means in operational carbon terms. And then we looked at the 3rd area, which is what does that mean in terms of impacting car mileage. And from that assessment, we identified what the carbon impact potentially, or the worst case scenario, could look like. Now, I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight here is that all construction, whether it's this, whether it's a school, whether it's a care home, whether it's housing, will provide a carbon footprint. And so what we need to really get to is that point where we go, what is the strategic position or the strategic transport infrastructure that needs to be in place in terms of physical stuff? And say, once that's in place, how that then cuts carbon emissions, especially ongoing transport emissions. And so you need to look at carbon in the context of short-term and long-term emission reductions. So what we've done is we've worked with the consultants and others to say how we need to manage, if this gets approved, to minimise the carbon impact now, and how that would look like in the future, in the long term. I don't know if that helps, Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. That's really very helpful indeed. Great.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smith, second question.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me come back. Basically, two things. I did mention about the transport on neighbouring communities and had it been considered. You said yes, it had by the transport team or the transport assessment team. I'd like to know how it's been considered and what impacts will be negated if needs be. And also, a lot of people do mention the fact, is this all still needed because of the pandemic that has just sort of, you know, all the issues with that. People are now working differently. Because basically you mentioned the fact that this concurred with the travel plan 2011 to 2031, which since that was prepared, we have had all the issues. Now everybody's working differently. So is it still needed? That's my sort of points at the moment. Thank you.
Sure, I'm not sure who's best placed to answer that, Emma.
Yeah, so I'll come in first, and then what's really useful is we've actually got Jez Tuttle in the room today. So we'll bring him to the desk as well. But just to clarify, from a transport assessment perspective, you've quoted obviously the document, which is the adopted version of the transport plan that can be given weight. What the report also goes into is the fact that a consultation is out at the moment, and you'll be fully aware of that from the combined authorities perspective, that actually demonstrates that this is still, taking account of COVID, still part of that wider transport plan. So whilst the addendum report in front of you today says we can't give any weight to that emerging document, what I'm hopeful is that members will have seen that it's still part of that wider strategy, even taking account of the COVID. So if I can ask Jez now to come forward, what he'll be able to do is just to explain how the transport assessment team have considered the transport movements, and also the idea of need. And I think actually it's worth saying it does tie nicely into some of the questions that were being raised about carbon as well. And both David Allett and Jez have worked really closely with Cheryl and her team as well, just to show that there's a really joined up thinking from an officer perspective in the scrutiny of this application. Thank you, Jez.
Jez, welcome.
Thank you very much. Oh, it's working. Okay. So what I think I'll first do is answer the question about the transport assessment. The transport assessment used the county council zone transport model, strategic transport model, to look at the reassignment of traffic as a result of the Trumpington Park Ride. Please note this is reassignment. This is not new traffic. This is already somewhere on the road. So this traffic, it's just going somewhere else before it goes into Cambridge on the bus or cycle. So that's the first thing. So there will be a impact on some parts of the network, mainly the M11 actually, but it will take traffic off quite a wide area of the network if you look at the modelling as a whole. So it actually does reduce traffic in quite a few areas and put it onto a major road like the M11. So that's the first thing about the transport assessment. In terms of the actual sort of working of the travel hub, the carbon calculations that have been done are from the Design Manual for Roads and Bridges. It's a engineering-based criteria. What that does is it focuses down on a relatively small part of the network, which is around the travel hub and into Cambridge. the not problem, but the challenge with that is actually there's a wider impact, which is actually a positive impact that isn't necessarily picked up by that carbon assessment. That's not to say the assessment's wrong. It's just that the guidance is a very engineering, a very large major scheme led assessment, which doesn't always apply to absolutely every kind of scheme that we do. So it's more a case of actually that the guidance really needs to be updated to take into consideration, what we're doing here.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Smith?
Basically, I was looking at sort of what one of the parish councillors had said, the fact that they thought they was going to get more traffic in the village. I was a lot worried about seeing how that, how that had been taken care of.
The traffic actually, I've looked at the traffic flows. I've actually looked at this in detail, and actually along the A10, I think it's Hawkston Parish Council was the yes. So I looked at the traffic flows in the A10. There's no more traffic. It's actually a slight reduction because it brings traffic away from the where it was going through before and brings it onto the major roads and then brings it into the hub from the M11. I suppose I ought to go on to the question also, quite a pertinent one about COVID, because that's a very important one. So COVID has changed travel habits. We know that more people are working from home at the moment. What we also know is people are returning to offices for some days a week. What we also know is that people want to build more offices in Cambridge. Now, being the Transport Assessment Manager, I'm on the front line of people coming to me with pre-application inquiries and planning applications, and I can tell you that there is a lot of office growth in Cambridge. Now, why that is, I don't know, but people obviously think that they want to build offices, and a lot of them. And in fact, the next local plan does have a significant allocation of offices around Cambridge. So people obviously want to come to Cambridge, and people are building buildings which they're not going to build if they're not financially viable and people aren't going to fill them. So in fact, the growth in offices is probably going to be larger than projected originally when this Park and Ride was conceived. People still want to work in Cambridge. And whilst we are getting to see a pattern from COVID, which may or may not be a slight reduction in vehicle trips on any given day or across the week, there's still this huge wish to build more offices in Cambridge, even more so than we first thought. And this travel hub is going to be needed because Cambridge itself, between the M11, A14 and the A11, I mean, we don't have any space for more cars. So we need to get these people into Cambridge somehow. And so this is a critical part of an overall strategy of public transport improvements, park and ride sites. We've got the Camborne to Cambridge, we've got the Waterbeach, we've got the Greenway schemes. This forms part of that strategy. It shouldn't really be seen in isolation. It should be seen as this is a piece of a puzzle which we will then implement. And we can't implement this all at once because funding, resources, etc. So, I think this needs to be seen in the wider context of the whole.
Sure. No, I think you've answered the question, Jez. Appreciate it. Thank you. I think Emma Fitch did want to chip in as well.
Yeah, it was just really to build on that COVID element as well. And I think we are seeing changes to the way people are working. But at the same time, I think the Cambridge Biomedical Campus itself, and particularly Addenbrooke's Hospital, has also seen a change. So there will be some members on this committee that will have sat for the expansion of the original Trumpington Park and Ride and will know some of the issues with how it's been expanded to its absolute point of expansion already. And they will have also seen how at the time when we were looking at that application, the site was so overcrowded, people were actually parking where they shouldn't have been parking. and it was extremely inappropriate. At that time, Addenbrooke's were allowing full appointments, full slots and full visiting rights. Also, you would have had an element of some of the staff parking there. That needs to be taken into account because obviously through COVID, things have changed. And what I would say is something that's come out on I'm just putting this in context, it's not necessarily relevant for today, but the Baberham Road Park and Ride is actually a site that's actually going through planning permission. And I think it's at the point a decision is shortly going to be made, hopefully on that one, about expanding extra spaces. And Cheryl will come in and correct me if I'm wrong, but actually that's also a site where solar panels have been granted and the works are progressing to do that. Interestingly, one of the challenges that's come up is because there's been a delay in actually looking to get planning permission for the expansion area, and the fact that the COVID money that's come from central government is now coming to an end, the staff aren't being given the free car parking and the incentives they were. Therefore, there's going to be a higher demand back at that site again. And actually, we're going to have to look at innovative ways at how we deliver the solar panels on that site, because actually there's going to be an increased demand. This is something that's likely to come forward on this site as well. It's not to say that you don't 100% have to look at how the need for this is, particularly when you're weighing it up on the impact on the Greenbelt. But what I would say is that there's going to be some elements that will start seeing changes of patterns, particularly with those staff rights, if you like, within the Cambridge Biomedical Campus changing. But Cheryl, do you want to come in just to give that kind of context? Because I know that it's going to start changing the use of the sites.
So yes, we're just looking to move forward into constructing solar panels and EV chargers on Baberham Park and Ride. And in the discussion on our construction programmes, what we've had to accommodate is that the high demand for Baberham Park and Ride and how you take any car parking out of that location to undertake the construction. And so we've been having to work very closely with Addenbrooke's and the Biomedical Campus to identify how to move through communications people onto Trumpington Park and Ride and to encourage other forms of transport while we go through that construction phase. We're noticing that carfall into the park and rides is steadily increasing over time, and certainly since that 6th of June change of removal of free car parking, it's gone up during the last couple of weeks. That's come out of our conversation with Addenbrooke's just on Monday.
Okay, thank you. I think we've answered that COVID-related question quite fully now. I'm going to move on to Councillor Bradnam, who had a question of clarification.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, given the fact that we are only really due to be here looking at the responses to the reasons for objection the last time, I just wanted to ask if we do, as a committee, have an opportunity to ask for additions or amendments to the informatives. This, for me, I'll be clear, then you can tell me whether you want to do it under debate afterwards. This is to do with making the very best provision that we can for coaches, because to make this really a travel hub, what we want to do is to intercept coaches which come towards Cambridge and to provide better forms of transport going into town, so that we don't end up with coaches going in and parking on Queen's Road, for example. And also, I'm very mindful for our taxi drivers who may find this a very useful location to both pick people up for that exact sort of transfer, or and to charge their vehicles, because we know we need more charging for taxis and private hire vehicles. And so I just wanted to ask if we could ask for changes to the informatives with regard to that.
Sure. Well, without going into specific detail about the wording, I mean, generally we can add informatives to the recommendation should we grant approval. Could an officer clarify that?
Yes, and it's fair to say that we can certainly look at that, because one of the reasons, if we look at the reasons for deferral, it does say about demand levels and use of that travel hub. So although it's linked into the climate change, I'm content that we can do that anyway. So not a problem.
Sure. So if members did want to do that, I think we could pick that up in the debate a bit later on. Okay, members, I think that's all the questions of clarification we have at this stage for officers. We're going to move to our public speakers now. And our first public speaker is a representative of Harston Parish Council, Mr. Councillor Rupert Pearce-Gould, who I see is joining us virtually. Good morning, Councillor Gould.
Good morning, Mr. Batchelor, and thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. I have 5 points that I wish to raise at this point.
Before you start, just for clarification, you have 2.5 minutes to make those 5 points.
Okay.
So I will shut down the microphone at you when you're nearing the end, and
thank you very much.
Whenever you're ready, please.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to see we got the same.
Sorry, last interruption from me. There's been a request if you could speak a bit clearer, please, if that's okay.
Sorry?
Could you speak a bit clearer, please? There's been a request from the floor.
Okay. Right. This proposal is a continuation from the last one. I see that the committee's changed in the meantime, which is slightly disappointing, and I have to put that on record. However, the main point is here the demand level. The proposal itself will introduce delays on the road into Cambridge for both Harston and Hawkston people trying to turn onto the A10, and it's not directly a comparison of traffic through the village itself. But what I believe, and I do know from my own personal experience, that new office buildings won't need remote car parking. They'll need on-site car parking so that their workers can get there in one stop and not have an intermediate stop somewhere along the line, which will delay them travelling to work. The effect of this extension will actually, we believe, will put pressure on both Hawkston and Harston, and may even cause a demand for a bypass to be built earlier than would normally be expected. And we wondered if this has been built into your thinking, because there's going to be a complex road system, which will get even more complex. So we, in summary, don't believe that there should be no more than a temporary car park extension on the site, probably north of the M11, until such times as the EWR or the Cambridge Integrated Travel System is put in place. Turning to the north, we also believe that the changes proposed at Madingley will cause changes to affect Trumpington, and that looking at the transport report from Mott MacDonald, we note that half the traffic coming onto that site was going to come from the north in any event. Therefore, anything happening to the north of this site will have an impact. Thirdly, as a principle, I don't think using remote car parks is a very good way of planning a travel system. It will create links. It creates a secondary hub. So we've got a hub here at Trumpington. We're going to have another hub at South Addenbrooks or Cambridge South Station. And really, this is confused and unjoined up thinking by the planners on the travel side. We think we should expand the car park.
If you could start concluding, please, Councillor Gould.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think the other thing I was going to add is that a carbon calculation should actually consider the alternatives. We should actually do the calculations over 120 years, which is what East West Railway are using, for the carbon impact of the alternative of staying on the same site or going staying on Addenbrooke's site. But the final point I'd like to make is that this is an inappropriate.
Make it very quickly. The time is up.
The green belt should not be used for this purpose. It's an inappropriate use. The green belt was designed as a cordon sanitaire between Harston and Cambridge, or between Harston, Hawkston and Cambridge, and this is being destroyed. And we don't believe it will ever be returned to being the green belt again once it becomes a car park. Thank you very much for your time.
No problem. Thank you very much for those comments. If you could stay on the line for a few minutes in case there's any questions of clarification from committee members for you. I don't see any, so I think that was very clear. So again, thank you very much for your time, Councillor Gould.
Thank you.
And our next public speaker is Dr. Mike Moore, who's the chairman of Addenbrooke's Hospital, and he's with us in the room today. Dr. Moore. Addenbrooke's Hospital. If you press the button in the middle with the symbol of the speaking face, there you go.
Thank you.
You're on.
Thank you very
much. Good morning.
Much.
So as with the previous speaker, 2.5 minutes to address the committee, and at the end, if you could stay seated in case there are any questions for you at the end.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Chair and Committee, for inviting me. So, Chair of Addenbrooke's Hospital. So, two things really. Why does this matter to us, and why do we matter to you, if I like? In terms of why we matter to you, we are obviously the District General Hospital for Cambridge, South Cambs, East Cambs, International Hospital, regional and centre providing services across the whole UK for specialist health services. We're a huge economic asset to the south of the county. We employ 12,000 people directly, with a further 3,500 people we employ indirectly. We're a major, therefore, local employer, and we are very active in terms of apprenticeships, the biggest nurse apprenticeship scheme in the country, in the United Kingdom. And of course, our business is to return people to health, and therefore important for the livelihoods of people across the county. That's why we matter to you. Why does this matter to us? Because of our staff. At the moment, the one thing that worries me most is the recruitment and retention of our staff, and our ability, if you excuse the pun, to keep the show on the road. We employ people below the average Cambridge median wage. And when you add in the 3,500 people who we employ indirectly, significantly, in about 12 or 13% below the average median wage for Cambridge. My worries are, we have had COVID, as we talked about. That's created huge trauma for many people. Of course, the hospital staff have been working on site all the time through that period. They're exhausted. There's a fatigue in terms of just the sheer pressure. Cambridge is a very expensive place in which to live, and the cost of living crisis as a UK is compounding that. We're seeing an increase of 2 or 3% turnover in our staff, and I expect that to increase, not decrease, in the current economic climate facing us as a country over the next 12 months. We're now at the position of 20% of healthcare assistants turning over every year. These are not people who are expensively paid or well paid. They are below average wage. Most of them live outside of Cambridge. Half of our people live outside of Cambridge, more than half, and many of them coming in from the west or the south. Time after time after time, if I talk to our staff, travel and housing are the two things that will be important to their ability to carry on working in Addenbrooke's. And that is why integrated transport provision, time and again, comes up as the thing which is important to them. It's not a silver bullet, there's not one thing, but it is an important thing to us.
Great, thank you very much for that. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Moore? Councillor Bradnam?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Moore. I'm very mindful of the difficulties that both health and care are having with recruitment of staff. Is it your impression that because of the cost of housing locally, people will be willing to undertake this transfer of transport? Because one of the arguments has been that people don't wish to switch from one mode of transport to another. In other words, from their car, if they've come from out in the countryside, as it were, or elsewhere, and then to switch on a park and ride to a bus into town. Is it your impression they will be prepared to do that if the bus goes directly to the Addenbrooke's campus?
Yes, it is. I mean, they do that already, as we've heard already from your officer. The Babram Park and Ride site is actively used. The Trumpington Park and Ride sites are used. People do make that switch. They've accepted that there needs to be switches. It's not straightforward. They've accepted that parking on site, which we control very strongly, only those on very particular shift patterns are entitled to park on site. So that ability to do that is already there. It's already happening. And so I don't anticipate that being a further problem.
Great.
Come back.
One more.
So actually the most important thing for them is a regular, reliable bus service that quickly gets from the park and ride to the hospital, isn't it? That's what's going to encourage them to use it.
Assurance about it and the comfort that it will be there, the ability to do it, those are the important factors, not the fact that there is the need to shift. They accept they cannot drive all the way into work. And we are working well, and for example, in terms of subsidising bus travel for our staff as a further element of help and assistance towards that.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't think there's any further questions or clarification for yourself, so thank you very much for your time, Dr. Moore. And we'll move on to our next public speaker, who's speaking on behalf of the applicants, David Fletcher. Welcome back. And I believe you're being flanked by Peter Blake, the Director of Transport for the GCP. Good morning. So as with the previous speaker, I'm sure you're familiar with the process, but 2.5 minutes to address the committee. We have a traffic light system in front of you to assist with that. When you've got 30 seconds left, the amber light comes on, and then when your time's up, the red light comes on. So 2.5 minutes whenever you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll say we'll keep this brief because I think the officers have covered a lot of the key issues already. But to pick up on the reasons for deferral, firstly, whether the proposals are inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. As we've already heard from officers, a very robust analysis of alternative sites, both within and outside the Greenbelt, was undertaken. Expansion of the park and ride was dismissed for a number of reasons, relating to congestion around the M11, particularly the gyratory and vehicles travelling east, lack of capacity to meet the projected needs, and logistical problems associated with the need to close the existing park and ride. There is clearly a strong need for the travel hub to be situated within the Greenbelt in order to meet the need to intercept traffic as close as possible to the M11 A10 gyratory. The second point, whether very special circumstances exist for the development, and 3, whether the demand levels for the scheme demonstrate the need for the development. I believe this has been very well covered again by officers and by transport officers, but the 2 points are fundamentally linked. The demand for the travel hub has been subject to a very robust model, and as we've heard, this is the County Council's own model, which has been used to demonstrate the need for this scheme. This particular site was chosen because it scored best, both in terms of meeting the transport objectives of the scheme, but also providing maximum separation between Cambridge City on the one side and the villages of Hawkston and Harston on the other side of the development. The non-motorised path and biodiversity net gain also provide substantial benefits to the proposals. Lastly, we've considered climate change from the outset, and we believe that the provision for PV panels is a significant benefit which has been carefully balanced, and I'll hand over to Peter.
So the scheme was originally envisaged and originally taken forward by the County Council. As you heard this morning, it's in the current local transport plan for the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, and is in the emerging local plan that's currently out for consultation. And the scheme has been taken forward by the Greater Cambridge Partnership. So there is considerable consensus and agreement amongst the public agencies of the need for this scheme. As your transport assessment manager has outlined, the scheme intercepts traffic, it reduces traffic volumes in the area, and this is essential as traffic is returning following the pandemic, and the pressure on the existing network is considerable given the local plan growth. My final point, Chair, the scheme will also greatly improve the performance of the Junction 11 gyratory, reducing queuing on the motorway. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, do we have any questions of clarification for the two gentlemen? No, I think that's all very clear, given this is probably the third time you've addressed the committee. I'm sure it's all been covered before, but thank you very much for your time. And our next speaker is Ms. Jane Patterson-Todd, who I believe is with us as well in the room. And Ms. Patterson-Todd is representing Cambridge Ahead. And welcome. And as with previous speakers, 2.5 minutes, we have the traffic lights in front of us to assist with that. And whenever you're ready, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for inviting me this morning. We're a business and membership organisation for the largest employers in the region. Given the strategic importance of the connectivity needed, the location needs to be one which most fully responds to the transport needs our city region is facing in the medium and long term. One perspective I can offer comment on is future demand, and there are two aspects to this. Firstly, economic demand. Cambridge Ahead commissions and publishes data on our regional economy through the Centre of Business Research. And this has consistently shown the regional economy to have been incredibly robust to the economic turbulence of recent years and continues to grow in employment at a rate well above the national average, which actually declined last year by 1.7%. In the last year, Cambridge, the Cambridge region, defined by 20-mile radius, grew by 4.2%. Of significant note, the knowledge-intensive sectors by 10.7%, with life sciences up by 18.5%. This makeup of our economy is such that we are positioned to be equally resilient looking forward, with no signs of abating in the medium to long term, which is obviously good for job creation. This hub is strategically positioned to service well the sectors I have described and of vital importance. Secondly, the travel demand within that context. Understanding how changing working practices are impacting travel is another area we have undertaken and published primary research on through the New Era of the Cambridge Economy report, NEACE. The clearest evidence we have found is that private car usage is dominating the post-pandemic period. This means that we need to do even more than before to offer appealing alternatives to the car, whilst also recognizing for those, as established earlier, who travel from outside Cambridge, part of the journey is still likely to be car-based. We remain interested in how types and patterns of travel may change in the future, but are firmly of the view that travel hub assets surrounding the city will be a vital in responding to any evolution of travel demand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, questions of clarification, please. No, again, all very clear. So thank you very much for your time today. Okay, our next public speaker, who I believe is joining us virtually, is Mr. James Littlewood. Mr. Littlewood, do we have you with us?
Yes, good morning, councillors.
Good morning, and probably worth pointing out you're the chairman of Cambridge Past, Present and Future.
I'm the Chief Executive, Chair.
Chief Exec, sorry, my apologies. Mr. Littlewood, so you have 5 minutes to address the committee, and if you wouldn't mind holding on the line at the end in case there are any questions of clarification for yourself.
Thank you, councillors. You'll note in the officer report that the conclusion of the officers remain unchanged. This actually leaves you with more discretion than the current report may lead you to believe. It states that it is considered that the proposals in the planning balance just tips in the favour of the development. Although your task is to decide whether to grant planning permission, you are in effect being asked to decide between two future scenarios for transport in the Cambridge area. The scenario you are being asked to approve is that people are enabled to drive to the edge of Cambridge and then transfer to more sustainable transport. This envisages the majority of people's journey made by private car. There are already 5 park and ride sites on the edge of Cambridge, and they've not solved the area's traffic congestion problems. The alternative scenario is that people are enabled to access sustainable transport closer to where they live. This envisages the majority of people's journey into Cambridge made by sustainable transport. Planned investment in rail, bus and cycling is intended to give people more sustainable options to access Cambridge in future. The A10 and M11 corridors are served by frequent rail services and numerous local stations. A huge amount of investment is planned to enhance rail access even more. Cambridge South Station will provide direct access to the biomedical campus, and Cambridge Station already provides access to CB1 and the city centre, and Cambridge North to the Science Park. East-West Rail, if it happens, could also give residents of Camborne, St Neots and Bedford direct access to Cambridge South and Cambridge stations. Encouraging more people to drive to a park and ride on the western edge of Cambridge will undermine all that investment. The Greater Cambridge Partnership is proposing to heavily invest in improving the coverage and quality of bus services from surrounding villages and town. Again, encouraging more people to drive to a park and ride on the edge of Cambridge will undermine that investment. The Greater Cambridge Partnership is also investing in a network of new rural cycleways to give people safer and more convenient access to Cambridge, local railway stations and express bus services. Again, encouraging people to drive to the edge of Cambridge will undermine that investment. For these reasons, we believe that the M11 Park and Ride is the wrong scheme in the wrong place. It's a short-term solution that will have a long-term effect of reinforcing current travel behaviours. We encourage you to refuse this application because it will result in building over the Greenbelt countryside to create a giant car park, a new bridge, new junctions and other intrusive infrastructure. The documents gloss over the fact that park and rides encourage car travel and that in total parking spaces will be provided for 3,600 cars. You have to use a car to get to them, and the majority of the person's journey will be made by car. It's therefore misleading to claim that they reduce car travel and are somehow a form of sustainable transport. They in fact sustain existing car travel, and they can generate new trips by abstracting people from public transport. This was seen at Milton Park and Ride, which abstracted passengers from the bus service from Ely. So contrary to much of the information presented to you, this is not in any way a sustainable development, and as the environmental statement concludes, would result in a net increase in carbon emissions. There's a strong policy basis for you to refuse this application. It's contrary to Greenbelt policy because it's not demonstrated that a Greenbelt location is needed. As I've just described, there are other ways of addressing the transport problem that do not require a car park in the Greenbelt. If they are needed, then an additional 950 spaces could be provided through multi-storey at the existing Trumpington Park and Ride. Secondly, the solar ports are inappropriate development in the Greenbelt and will have a negative impact on the openness of the Greenbelt. There's no evidence that the applicant has considered other non-Greenbelt locations for generating renewable energy to offset the emissions from this development. There are also grounds for deferring this application again if you wish to. There appears to be no modelling of air quality levels in Harston, which would result from increased traffic queuing on the A10 caused by the Park and Ride. And there's no modelling of the impact of the Park and Ride on the planned changes to bus services, which could undermine an already agreed strategic sustainable transport initiative. Finally, due to the reduction in demand caused by the pandemic, it's clear that at the present time, there's no need for an additional car park. However, if the committee is minded to approve this application, then we ask you to impose the following conditions. Firstly, that the development does not proceed until the use of the current Park and Ride returns to a level that justifies the construction of a new car park. In other words, once a trigger point is reached. And secondly, that the construction of the new Park and Ride is phased, with subsequent phases only allowed to proceed when the level of use justifies expansion, again at an agreed trigger point. And the applicant has previously indicated that this could be phased into 3 sections of 700 spaces each. And finally, in relation to the country park, the officers propose a condition which we thoroughly support, but we'd like to make sure that that condition makes it essential what is considered as significant increase to visitors to the meadows and what the consequences will be if remedial action is not adequate. So thank you for your time. I trust that you'll take our points into consideration when making your decision.
Thank you very much, Mr. Littlewood. If you wouldn't mind holding on the line in case there's any questions of clarification for you from members. Members, do we have any? No, I think that was all very clear. And obviously your paper you sent around as well obviously did assist with that as well. So thank you very much, Mr. Littlewood.
Thank you.
Okay, members, final speaker who I've seen has been hanging on the line for a while now, Councillor Brian Milnes. Morning, Councillor.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee. Thank you.
Before you kick off, just to let you know, you also have 5 minutes as well to address the committee, and then there may be some questions for you at the end if you wouldn't mind staying on the line.
Thank you. I'm the local, or one of 2 local members for this area for the Shelfords up to Haslingfield. So that's my reason for being here today. My first point is possibly related to an informative. So the cycle provision and the new bridge for cyclists and pedestrians is somewhat diversionary. And I think for the sort of professional type cyclists who typically are wearing Lycra, actually expecting them to go this diversionary route. So I'd like to ask for consideration of cycling route provision alongside the A10, so that those people that want to go the least circuitous route can do so. On the issue of solar panels, I'd like to just point out that we've got an impending crisis for generation of renewable energy. Provisioning solar panels at this site will allow our buses, taxis, and even our electric bikes, which are all going that way, to adequately have provision when the local power network is deficient in that regard. We need to be using renewable energy as close to its usage as possible. I must say, picking up on James Littlewood's point of phasing, I think that's accepted as a route. So perhaps we can have some commentary on that from officers. But the primary issue that is of concern to locals, I think, is about the potential impact, and rather than reducing congestion on these routes, is that it actually worsens. So we've got an expansion going on in Trumpington Meadows right now. We've got the additional developments at Hawkston Mill. We've got, in fact, I would have asked questions of the officers, talked about the impact on the road network, because I'm interested in understanding the relationship between the northbound M11, southbound M11 and A10 on this junction at the moment. I live locally, and I'm very familiar with the scene at 7 o'clock in the morning, albeit pre-pandemic, of half a mile or more of queuing traffic trying to get off the M11 onto this junction. And again, I'm concerned that we don't see any detail of advanced mover or scoot traffic light sequencing for this development to make sure that the local residents don't get a worsening situation rather than an improving situation when this is built out. So it's not just M11 traffic, it's local traffic coming from surrounding developments and villages. You've heard that the economic growth situation is very favourable in this respect in terms of economic growth, but this has a major impact on the availability of sustainable traffic routes into the sites and the city, particularly CBC and the city centre. So we have to take that into consideration, because clearly the existing park and ride is very busy. It's not capable of expanding. And so with those comments, I'll leave you to your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Before you log off, do any committee members have any questions of clarity for the local member? No. So we thank you, Councillor Milnes, for your time. And with that, members, that concludes all of our public speakers. So we're going to be moving into the debate section of the proceedings shortly. Obviously, keep in mind we do have officers with us in the room and virtually that can answer any questions that may have occurred to you since the officer's presentation, and obviously the comments we've had from those public speakers. So with that, I will open the debate now, members, if anybody would like to kick us off. Councillor Corney, we haven't heard from you yet, if you want to start.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, at the last meeting, I seconded the proposal to defer this. I think it was obviously the right decision to make, because it was obviously unanimous at the time. I look back at obviously the reasons why we done that at the time, and I think the questions we raised, and I think the officers have gone away and done a very good job, I think, to sort of come back and satisfy those questions that we had. I'm not going to go, obviously we'll leave the debate, see where it goes at the moment, but I think at the moment we're very often asked on these committees, on planning committees, to sort of approve things that we might not necessarily like, but which is our why we have to scrutinise them like we have done. So I think at the moment, I think we've done a very good job of scrutinising them, and I won't make a recommendation or proposal yet, but I was struggling to see anything to sort of refuse on at the moment. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you for that. That's very helpful. Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you. We've spoken about informatives. We're clearly not making a decision yet, but we've spoken about those. And Councillor Brian Mills raised one about an informative about the cycling bits. Basically, there is a concern about what the traffic will make on the local communities. And I know I keep harping on, but is there a way we could put some sort of an informative in there that if there is a problem, it will be looked into in discussion with the local members? So as people are not just forgot about, or they seem like, oh, it's going to go in, you know, if we get a problem, we've got to live with it. Can we write some sort of informative that it would be looked into?
I'm sure we can add as many informatives as we like, but I'll look to officers if they can give us some advice around how we would go about that, or if they think that would be appropriate.
I'm struggling at the moment to see why that would need to be in there, but if I could sort of just try and externalize what my mind is thinking at the moment, and trying to think back on what Councillor Milnes raised as well. I think when we're looking at the M11 Junction 11, this is something that, get the name right now, National Highways are particularly interested in, because they're always looking at the capacity of that. As part of this scheme, there are amendments made to those junctions that take account of traffic that's coming and travelling northbound will be able to come off that and come around without the queuing. So going to what Councillor Milnes was saying about some of the queuing aspects of the M11 have certainly been considered in some detail, and actually some of the delays of getting the application to committee the first time around was because we were waiting for National Highways to remove their holding objection until they were happy with the modelling and the way that the M11 was going to work. And again, I'll just tackle the queuing on the M11 first, and then I'll come on to the local traffic. When you're looking at the queues pre-pandemic, I know that a lot of us now talk pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. A lot of the queuing aspects for those travelling southbound and coming off at Trumpington was because the way that junction works is whether you're going into the Park and Ride, or whether you're going into Cambridge City Centre, or whether you're going to the Addenbrooke's Biomedical Campus, you're all coming in that kind of inside lane. Part of the modelling that's been done of this new site, although there was reference to the fact 9 times out of 10 people will go on that inside lane to use the existing Park and Ride, actually this new site allows the ability, and it's been considered in the modelling work as well, that actually if people wanted, if there was a queue, they could actually go round that gyratory into the new site as well. So all of that modelling has been taken into account, and I'll probably just rely on Jez to come up to the table at some point just to go through this. As part of those, and particularly the concerns about queuing traffic back onto the M11, the junction improvements and the way that the traffic lights are going to be designed and taken into have also been looked at by, in fairness to Jez, it would be the Highways Development Management officers. So that would actually be Dr. John Finney that would have looked at all of that. As part of that, they'll be looking at where the traffic comes from. And certainly, as I know the area very well myself as well, when they're looking at where the hold-ups are, and I think this is something that's cumulatively happened over the years with the Hawkston development, for example, what was Bayer Crop Science, and the historically, if people want to go right back, Shearings or Fyton site, have meant that you're getting different hold-ups along that sort of Harston-Hawkston interchange already. All of that's been done in the modelling, and actually this is probably quite timely to bring up the fact of one of the earlier suggestions as well was linked in with the improvements or the works that are being proposed at the Madingley Road intersection as well. So when Jez comes up and looks at the modelling from a modelling perspective of where the cars are coming from, he's looked at it in an overarching transport model that's looked at all of that growth, and it's looked at all of these developments along that side. As part of that, I don't know whether Jez will be able to comment on precisely how the traffic lights will work, or whether actually that's going to be part of the condition information that comes in, and further information on the design of that, which Dr. John Finney will then look at. As to how it holds it up, as it does in a lot of our existing sites, and I'm thinking in particular Milton, when that was done previously, with the A10, where that one comes out to, you have like an intelligent one where it knows how the flows need to work, and I can quite imagine that that will need to be built in, and that will be something that Highways Development Management and also the national highways, struggle to keep getting the right name for them, all take into account. But Jez, do you want to come to the table and just have a look at that, and whether there's anything else that you want to add? I do note that it would be Dr. John Finney from Highways Development Management, that you obviously have looked at where the cars are coming from, how it models through, and you'll be aware of some of those wider developments as well that will have been referenced. Thank you.
Thank you. I just didn't want residents who feel like they may get a problem to think like they've been forgot about. That's why I'm trying to bring in some sort of peace of mind that if they get a problem, it will be looked into.
Yeah, and I suppose the thing is it for the planning system to do that, or is there a way that as part of the follow-up modelling that comes in, is it captured at that point? And that's the bit I'm trying to get my head around before I suggest that an informative would be right or not.
I mean, I wish I could put this up on the screen, but I can't. But I've got a nice map here of where the traffic reduces and where the traffic increases around the M11. So effectively, the strategic model does reassign the traffic, as I said before. The M11 North sees more traffic, the M11 South sees less traffic, and a lot of the surrounding areas see less traffic, with some other sort of areas of reassignment in the sort of more rural areas to the east. And as Emma quite rightly said, the scheme at the junction 13, I think it is, no, 12, that scheme is designed to actually make it easier for traffic to get off the M11 and into the site as quickly as possible, because that's where we want people to be. And it also, I think it alleviates some of the existing issues as well that were a concern by Highways England, which is why it took a while to look at. So the scheme is fit for purpose. It gets people off the M11, it gets people where they need to be. It provides enough localized road capacity to do that. The scheme actually encourages more people onto the M11 and off the local roads. So I know that there's concerns been raised about people running through the villages. Well, actually, this scheme and this proposal was actually designed to actually take that away. It's designed to put the traffic where we want it, not where we don't want it. In terms of the traffic signals, we've got two sets of signals. We've got the one at the roundabout and we've got the one at the park and ride. They're quite far apart, so I'm not a signals engineer, but I don't think we'd necessarily link them, because I don't think that would be of any great benefit. What we would do as a matter of course these days, if we run them on a system called Mover, which is an intelligent system which learns traffic patterns. And what it does is it takes into consideration when there are lighter traffic flows on one arm, and then reassigns green time effectively to other arms that might be slightly more queued up. And it actually learns on a daily sort of basis when this is going to happen. So rather than the first time it runs, or the first few weeks that it runs, the first few months, it's reacting, and then it becomes proactive. So it actually starts to learn when this is going to happen. I know it sounds a bit sci-fi, but this does actually happen. It's a very good system. So signal control is very, 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 very powerful these days. And we can also put in other circuit breakers, as it were. So if something unforeseen happens, then we've got emergency plans that the signals can jump into and say, right, I need to get rid of a queue here, or this has happened, so I need to do this. It's a very intelligent system.
I think that's helpful, Jez. So Emma, going back to Councillor Smith's concern, which was around, should the modelling not behave as we're expecting it to, and the traffic situation does worsen in the villages, can we include something in the planning process to essentially review that?
Okay, so what I would say is condition 14 is detailed highway drawings. And as part of those detailed highway drawings, there's a requirement for the proposed signalled vehicle access junction off the A10 to the new travel hub site. What we could do is to add an informative that makes reference to the need for those designed when they're submitted to go into how this will ensure that there won't be over issues, if you like, on the existing network around that. I think that's probably the best way of doing it, and actually having it in the minutes of this meeting to show the concerns they can also be referenced as well. But I think, yes, if we link the informative to condition 14 and just say when those come in, it needs to be able to demonstrate how the flow on that A10 will work for the existing communities. I think it's probably the safest way of doing it.
Okay, does that help, Councillor Smith? Good. Who's next? Councillor Bradnam. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as one of the people who've been part of this committee looking at this throughout the time, and I noticed that the gentleman from the Parish Council mentioned that he was disappointed that the committee had changed, and of course I would remind him that we've had an election since, and so some members are different, I think. Is that right? No, it's not. Sorry, a different election. But nevertheless, changes do happen on committees, and obviously people who are coming to this committee, as the chairman clarified early on, have made it clear that they've looked back through all the paperwork. But onto the substantive. I also wanted to point out that I agree with Councillor Corney. I think the deferral was appropriate. It's a big piece of infrastructure, and it is significant for the area around Cambridge, and particularly for the communities close to it. And so I think it's important that we've looked at these concerns carefully and thoughtfully, and we've been given more information about the justification for putting this in the green belt, or the reasons why it's important that it's there. We've also been advised about the demand, and it's been confirmed that there is predicted to be an increase in demand, taking account of COVID as well. And we've heard from the business community that there is almost certainly going to be increased demand in this area. We've heard that solar panels, whilst not ideal in the green belt, actually we as a county council who have a carbon commitment, it's really important. We've even heard from the local member that actually it's important that we use spaces that are available to us for renewable energy. And we know that it's so important that we provide renewable energy close to the place where it needs to be used. So we've got justification for the carbon calculations as well. Coming as a resident of Milton, way back when the Park and Ride at Milton was proposed, of course people in Milton were concerned about it, but we also recognised that it could provide a benefit to us locally in another source of transport, not only into the city, but actually to the Addenbrooke site. So, you know, inevitably, because of the need to be close to local communities, Park and Rides very often are in the green belt. In fact, all of the others are. And so, you know, we recognise that there are reasons why Park and Ride sites do need to be placed in the green belt. And indeed, County Highways have clarified that there will be an ongoing need for this sort of provision. And in fact, from my own point of view, again, as a resident of Milton, so I have access to direct ordinary buses and Park and Ride buses, and I use different buses for different purposes. I can also use Cambridge North Station. And so it's important, you know, we can't predict everything. We can't be sure of everything, but what we must do as a responsible county council is make as many options possible, available as possible. And so this does at least give more options for sensible, sustainable public transport in this locality. I hear the concerns that Mr. Littlewood raises, but personally, I'm not convinced by his point that if you put this in, you take away capacity or the justification for people to use sustainable public transport from further afield. I think it's really important that we do have this interception on the M11 for the traffic from the west before it attempts to go into Cambridge. So I'm also just minded that I will now raise the point about the informatives. One of the things when we first as a committee looked at this as a twinkle in the eye of, a possibility. One of the things was said really early on by city councillors, and I think we've looked at this at JDCC, the Joint Development Control Committee as well, was that we wanted to make sure that this site would would have the potential to intercept coaches that might otherwise go into Cambridge. We know that there's a air pollution issue in the centre of Cambridge, and we want to reduce that. So until we have electric coaches, I'd like us to put in an informative regarding maximising the potential for interception of tourist coaches coming to visit Cambridge and using this as a site where tourist coaches could stop and other electric forms of transport could go into Cambridge to avoid, the use of Queen's Road as a parking lot. And in that regard, absolutely, I want us to maximise the use of electric charging, because we know that our local bus services are trying to switch over to electric buses. So I want it to be an opportunity for electric buses to recharge. And I also want it to be useful as a place where private hire drivers and taxi drivers, hackney carriage drivers can recharge electric vehicles which are required in Cambridge and increasingly in South Cambs. And there could be a sensible link up between these forms of transport if there is suitable provision for the drivers of these vehicles to be expected to stay for relatively long periods of time. For example, if a tourist coach came from elsewhere and visitors wanted to visit Cambridge, they will probably be there for some considerable portion of the day, in which case the driver needs to be able to relax somewhere and to get something sensible to eat. So I would like us to look at making that travel hub a suitable place for drivers to wait and be refreshed and for quite long periods of time. So I don't know if there's some kind of informative we could put in that. I'm also not going to declare my hand as regards voting, but I just would like that to be considered, Chair, if we can do that.
Okay, well, let's ask officers for some comments on those. So I think there were suggestions for informatives around three things from what I could, what I've written down here. So maximise the potential for intercepting coaches to take it off the motorway, electric charging points for all types of vehicles that can be charged, and a suitable waiting point for coach and bus drivers who need to. So a bit of a task for you there. Emma?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the principle. What I'm just trying to do at the moment is to work out which condition to link it in with. I suppose the most
19,
obvious, I was going to say
19.
17 was the most obvious. I tell you for why I was thinking 17. We did look at 19, but 19 is about the bus and the coach service provision from the site as opposed to interception. So I wasn't 100%. It does sort of link in with that, but at the same time, what we're really asking is for the promotion and discussion routes to try and get those coaches to go there. I don't think it's about the provision necessarily, unless you disagree. So what I was thinking was the low emission strategy that talks about how the site will be used for charging, electric charging points, etc. We could have an informative as part of that low emission strategy, because that's part of reducing the emissions, which is effectively what you're asking to do and linking into charging. Would that be acceptable?
I'm led by you, Ms. Fitch. The other thing is, could that be used to, could the reduction of pollution be used in this low emission strategy? Is that what we can use as well to reduce pollution? If we can intercept coaches which would otherwise come directly in when visiting Cambridge, can we use this to encourage them to stay at the park and ride and use electric sources of transport to go into the city?
It certainly ties in with the reason for the condition, and as part of that updated carbon assessment of the total change in emissions, that would be possible. I suppose my nervousness is when the applicant comes to do this, we're back to behavioural change again. So how much control do you have over it? I realise an informative is merely an informative, but I do want to make sure that we can deliver on it as well. So
my view is there anything that we can do to encourage people to change their behaviours, including the providers of visits to Cambridge, we should be doing, because we know there is a problem with air pollution in the centre of Cambridge, and we should be doing things to try to reduce that as well. But I'll be led by you.
So yeah, Emma, I think you understand what Councillor Brenham's asking for. Do you want to have a think about it, and then we can come back to that before we make a decision? Okay. Members, does anybody else wish to contribute to the debate at this stage? Councillor Ray.
Right, I'd like to say I'm strongly in favour of this application, and I think the debate today has been a very intelligent and informed one, and it's good to hear the professional arguments being made for traffic flow and for demand. I think the key is in the word hub, that this is a means to implement a much wider strategy to reduce congestion in Cambridge. Even if all vehicles suddenly became electric, it would still be necessary simply to keep Cambridge moving. The modelling shows that the level of vehicle use is unsustainable at the moment. To say that the park and rides aren't working is simply that they are absorbing the traffic that would already, were they not there, be completely clogging up Cambridge. This is a hospital with associated research and laboratory facilities. It's destined to increase in employment to nearly 30,000 people by 2030. It's a people-intensive industry. It needs nurses, doctors, cleaners, maintenance people, laboratory technicians, and it also needs patients and their visitors. So it's not something that will be hugely affected by remote working. And I think a compelling case has been made for the increase in that employment in that particular area. In terms of it, just in recent years, we've seen a clustering, Papworth coming in to the site. We've seen AstraZeneca coming in from the northwest of England. There are really good complementary advantages of putting together similar disciplines, and so I find the arguments from the business community and from the hospital for this very compelling in it being necessary. So put my cards on the table. I'm going to support this application.
Good, thank you very much. Members, we've heard from two members now indicating a desire to support this. Does anyone have any alternate views to that, or wishes to put anything to the contrary forward, or any concerns they may have about the application in front of us? Can't see any. Okay, well, Emma, how are we on those informatives?
Okay, I've actually seen that there's a guidance on the information required to satisfy draft condition 19, which is the details of the bus and coach services, which is something that Cheryl French's team requested. And as part of that, it said, in order to ensure that the details of bus and coach service provision submitted for condition 19 also takes account of the energy usage and carbon assessment of the development, the applicant is strongly encouraged to demonstrate that the site would be suitable for electric buses and coaches, including consideration of whether specialist electric buses and coach charging facilities would be required at this site or elsewhere, whilst also demonstrating the design has taken into account at the Greenbelt location in relation to all sensitive receptors. This is to ensure that all future carbon emissions are reduced as far as possible, which links in with the carbon assessment modelling being requested to minimise the carbon footprint of the project as far as possible. So what I'm minded to do is to actually suggest that we include within that not only the details of the bus and coach service provision submitted for that, where it's saying energy usage, we build in the ability for the coaches to come as part of that. Then I'm just looking if there's an informative. I can't see an informative to go with 17 at the moment. So it's whether we do an informative that kind of captures everything and then refers to 17 and 19, or we do an informative for 17 as well. I don't have an issue either way, really.
If I may, Chair?
Yeah.
Thank you. My initial assumption was that it might be helpful to put it as an informative to 19, simply because this is the one on, which is it, which is already being, which already is, it's intended to have an informative with it on our page 52 of the agenda, because it refers, it's the addition of the words including the use of electric vehicles. And so I just wondered if since we're changing that, maybe we could expand that amendment. But suffice it to say, I would just like it to serve to channel thinking towards interception of coaches to avoid them otherwise going into Cambridge City. I'd also like something about the facilities for drivers if they're going to be there for some time while vehicles are being charged. That's the travel hub itself, and I'm not quite sure which bit that might cover. You know, that would sort of, if you want to do it through emissions, that's fine. My feeling was it perhaps might have felt better under 19, but the other one was, could we do something about making the travel hub suitable? For example, that there should be facilities sufficient for the number of drivers and for a length of time, if they're there waiting for vehicles to charge, for example.
Okay, so I think
in the continent, you know, these places are set up as places where you set your car to charge and you go off and have a lovely meal, or you know, whatever. I'm not saying we necessarily do that here, but I do think that the travel hub needs to be suitable for coach and taxi drivers while they're waiting for vehicles to charge.
Understood. So I think of all the informatives that have been suggested, one from Councillor Smith and a few from Councillor Bradnam, I think the final one we are looking to implement, if appropriate, Emma, I'm looking at you for some advice on that, is around the facilities for those waiting whilst their vehicles charge. Put you on the spot there, appreciate. But
yeah, you are. So can I just, as much as I love doing about 5 things at the same time, can we just do one thing at a time? So can we go back to the informative for condition 19, and we'll just get that one sorted first, and then we'll look at a way as to whether indeed we've got it covered elsewhere. Because when we talk about the low emission strategy, we're talking about concepts that have already been put forward by the applicant, and the applicant may well have already covered that, and that's where I'm a little bit on the spot. So let's just deal with 19 first. So where we have in brackets at the moment, including consideration of whether specialist electric bus and coach charging facilities would be required at this site or elsewhere, potentially we could add, and how the use of the site by coaches travelling into Cambridge could be intercepted. So that would pick it up under that condition.
Sorry, is that, forgive me, I couldn't see where, we've got narrative on amended wording on page 53, which covers the details of the bus and coach service, and then later further down at the bottom of that text, it refers to guidance on heating sources for the travel hub. And I was wondering if in that, I know it's heating sources, but I just wondered whether that might be a way that we could put it in about, and suitable provision for people who might need to stay there. Sorry, I'm straying into the other one again. Sorry, let's stick with 19 for the time being. But
so I think Emma's question was her suggestion of the informative to cover coaches.
Yes.
I think that's what encapsulates your desire.
The answer is yes.
Tick. Next.
Thank you. I think obviously my face was saying it, wasn't it, without my mouth. Okay, so then what we could do is at the moment with the travel hub building, we put the informative on about the heating sources because that was something, again, that Cheryl team were looking to do. So when we're looking at the travel hub building, that's a single story building itself. That's not the internal layout. I think what you're kind of going into is a combination of the internal layout about how does the layout allow this sort of thing to happen. And then it goes into the low emission strategy as well. So I'm trying to think, I actually think that the best way of doing it would be to have, if members are minded, an informative that just refers to the charging, access to charging for all users. So that doesn't narrow it down in any way. And then we can link that to those two conditions. But that's going to require me to go offline quickly and just write something down to work back, unless anyone that's online in support could come up with something.
Emma, through you, Chair, could we suggest, for example, and suitable waiting facilities?
Do you want to try drafting something for me? And then that might be easier, and then we can we'll see if we can do it between us.
Would it, Emma, would it help if you took a 5-minute break? Yeah. Would that help? Okay. Members, it's 11:40. We're going to 5-minute break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, I think we're there. We go live again, please, Dan. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cambridgeshire County Council's Planning Committee. A slightly longer recess than anticipated, but we are now back. Before the break, we were discussing wording for some potential informatives that we may wish to include should the committee agree. I'm going to pass over now to Emma Fitch, who's going to run through the wording of those informatives, and then we can make a decision whether we wish to include them or not. Emma.
Thank you, Chair. So if I start with the ones that we were discussing ahead of the recess, and then we'll move to the one that Councillor Mandy Smith actually proposed as well, and then members can input accordingly. So in relation to the guidance that already exists for draft condition 19, which is details of bus and coach service provision, I'm proposing that after the word elsewhere and before the closing of the bracket in the text that's already in your agenda pack. So if I move to that agenda
page 53.
Page 53, thank you. We would look to add the words "and how the use of the site by coaches travelling into Cambridge could be intercepted." For the purposes of the minutes, what that takes into account is that the site already as part of the proposals includes the provision of 12 spaces for coaches. And also the proposed internal layout for the hub building has a small area for waiting facilities, I think a vending machine, but certainly access to toilets. And it includes the charging. So that element is already there. And what I would just remind members, when you're doing your planning balance, obviously this is a site in the Greenbelt. So what the applicant has already done is look to minimise the impacts and retain the openness. The location and the size of that building, and particularly that it's a single story, is to take that into account. So what we wouldn't want to do is to increase that area of the waiting facilities for the potential, because that would increase the potential harm to the openness of the Greenbelt. In saying that, that wouldn't actually stop any coach driver or taxi driver or anyone else that was linked up to a charging facility, the ability to actually use the public transport in our area and actually go into the town or to other areas to access wider facilities. So I think that hopefully has everything covered, but I'll, first of all, before I move on to the next one, I'll just come to Councillor Bradnam to confirm she's content with that.
Just to get the wording, did I hear you say after the word elsewhere, that the wording would be how the use of the site for coaches travelling into Cambridge could be intercepted, because that isn't quite grammatical. And I would simply suggest that we say how coaches travelling into Cambridge could be intercepted at this site.
I think grammar aside, are you content with the thrust of the informative?
Absolutely, I'm content with it, but
Okay.
it's just a bit.
Okay, understood. Emma, are those all the conditions relating, sorry, all the informatives relating to condition 19?
So that's the informative for 19, and that takes that element up. Would you like me to move on to condition 14?
I was going to say, does anyone have any issues or has any objection to including that informative with condition 19? No, okay, so should permission be granted, we will include that. Emma, condition 14?
Thank you, Chair. So in relation to condition 14, if you remember, there was some concern around the junction access into the travel hub building and the phasing and the design of those traffic lights. And that's something, as I said at the time, would be looked at in more detail by Dr. John Finney and others in the Highways Development Management team. But in order to capture that, what I'm suggesting is that we have an informative that's titled Guidance on Information Required to Satisfy Draft Condition 14, Detailed Highway Drawings. And that says something along the lines of, hopefully my grammar will be correct, is in order to ensure the concerns around the local road network raised at Planning Committee on the 15th of June 2022 are fully considered for bullet point 2 within condition 14, the applicant will need to demonstrate how the proposed signal vehicular access junction off the A10 will avoid unnecessary delays to the local villages. I content with that, Councillor Smith.
Agreed. Yes.
Good. And again, the same questions. Any member have any objection to including this? Should permission be granted? No. Okay. So we will take that as included. Should we grant permission? I think that covers all the informatives. Emma, is that right? Yes.
As far as I'm aware, unless any member tells me otherwise.
Good. Okay. Well, Councillor Smith.
I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Good. I was just going to come on to that. So unless any members want to contribute anything further to the debate, I am happy to take the proposal.
I'm happy to second the proposal.
Super. So members, we have a recommendation on page 50, and that is to approve planning permission subject to the conditions laid out, plus the informatives we've just discussed. We have a proposal from Councillor Smith to accept that, and Councillor Bradnam has seconded. Members, can I ask those of you in favour of that to raise your hands, and I'll ask Dan to do a quick head count, please.
Thank you, Chair. That's unanimous. 8 votes in favour.
Thank you. For clarity, for completeness, anyone voting against? And abstentions? No. So that application is unanimously approved. Okay. Thank you very much for that, members and officers.
Before I move on, can I just clarify, just for particularly for members of the public, although members have now confirmed unanimously that that will be approved, what we have to do is make the referral to the Secretary of State. So once we've got everything up to date and we've updated the relevant informatives with the conditions, etc., we will need to do a formal referral. So no decision will actually be made until the Secretary of State decides whether that will be called in or not. What I can say is, while we were live streaming, I did get notification from the relevant caseworker at DLUX, so I know that they are taking a keen interest in this. So once we have their information, we can update members accordingly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you everyone for your time, officers and our public speakers who've joined us today. Thank you very much for your time and patience. With that, we're going to move on once Councillor Smith switches her mic off.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. Members, we're now on to item, what number are we? One sec. We're up to item number 5, which is an enforcement update report. I believe Alex Rankin is joining us to present this. Alex, if you could come forward to the table here, the microphone's fine. I'm assuming you know how the mics work. Okay, the button at the very bottom of the screen, the picture of the speaking face, switches it on and off. And if you'd like to present the report to us, please.
Thank you, Chair. So good morning, I'm Alex Rankin, Planning and Compliance Officer, and I'm here to present the Enforcement Update Report in Deborah Jekin's absence. The report before the member today gives an overview of the work of the Enforcement and Monitoring Team in County Planning, Minerals and Waste for the period the 1st of December 2021 to the 31st of May 2022. The date of the 31st of May takes into account the need for legal review and the advanced publication of the report, and these reports are usually presented to the committee quarterly, provided there are other agendas to put before members. Section 2 of the report details the number of complaints the team has received, investigated and closed in the reporting period, and the status of these complaints that are open and under investigation. The report details the proactive monitoring of the planning permissions and conditions attached to 40 mineral extraction and landfill sites that we visit a number of times each financial year, for which the work is chargeable. The team also inspects waste sites that do not fall under the chargeable monitoring regime, along with visits undertaken in connection with enforcement investigations, the details of which are contained in paragraph 6.4 of the report. The team also assists with determining planning applications, but these are not included in the report. Prior to planning committee, update reports are presented to member emails and sent to each of the parish councils and local members. This is in respect to the updates given to enforcement investigations detailed in sections 7 to 14 of the report, and local members are kept updated at key stages of ongoing investigations where a breach has been confirmed. There are no amendments to the report or updates since publication, and there is no recommendation in the report, but I'm happy to try and answer any queries that members may have.
Great, thank you very much. As Alex just mentioned, we've just been asked to note the report, but if any members have any, and there are, have any questions around the report, happy to take them. Councillor Murphy, then Bradman.
Thank you very much. Could you give an idea about whether complaints are increasing or not? And if they are, why?
I wouldn't say we're seeing a specifically large rise in complaints, if I'm honest. There's obviously some contentious sites that you continually get complaints about, but as far as I'm aware, we're not seeing a massive increase.
Councillor Bradman.
Thank you, Chair. It's not really an interest because we're not making a decision, but I point out that I'm involved in the Mitchell Hill liaison group, and so my attention is on item 13 of your report on page 75 of our agenda. And you know, I'm very mindful this concern about the condition of the Hall Road has gone on for a long time, and the operator has been quite slow in responding. So I just wanted to say thank you for continuing to address this issue. And I'm sort of thinking, I really do hope it's resolved, as you said in paragraph 13.5, by September. This road should be completed by September 2022. And I'm also almost hesitant to ask, what are you going to do if it's not? Because this has gone on for over 2 years, that this road has not been sealed and prepared properly, and that really impacts on the residents who live on the site where these vehicles are going past. So I wondered if you could just give us a next step, or how likely you think it is that they're going to comply by September 2022. Thank you.
I would just remind people that the PCN is a legal questionnaire, so it would be an offence for any inaccurate information in response. But I'm not really sure, Emma, could you, what the next steps would be after?
Yeah, I'm actually going to bring Rachel in. I think she's put her camera on deliberately to be able to come in at that point. So Rachel, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was going to say PCN issue the operator.
Hang on a minute, Rachel. Can you turn your camera off?
Camera off? Yes, of course.
Please.
Yeah. Is it a bit? Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. I turned it on so that you knew I was in the wings. The operator and the agent are fully aware that a PCN has been issued and that the County Council is serious about the lack of progress that has been made in respect of this matter. And the assurance has been given that the Hall Road will be completed by September. And if that is not the case, then they are also aware that further action as appropriate would be taken by the County Council to ensure that that was completed as soon as possible.
And can I ask what sort of further action might be envisaged if they don't comply?
It would, if the applicant hasn't started the work at all, then we would be looking at the harm that is being caused by that lack of progress, and it may well be formal action that is taken. If the applicant has commenced those works, but for some reason legitimate, there is, they haven't been able to complete them, should we have a very wet August and they can't legitimately carry out those works or something like that, then obviously we would have to consider what would be reasonable for a timescale for the completion of those works. And obviously we would keep members and the committee informed of the situation and the timescales that have been put in place.
Thank you, Rachel. Can I ask any further detail is sort of taken offline? Is that okay? Thank you. No further questions, I think, on the enforcement report. So Alex, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us today. And we'll move on to the final item, item 6, summary of decisions taken under delegated powers. This is just a written report in our agendas. There's no presentation. If members have any specific questions they need to raise now, please do. No, okay. So we've just been asked to note that report. So I think we can say we've done that. And with that, before I close the meeting, as that was the last item, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to Rachel Jones, who just spoke to us, as it's now her last meeting with us, as she is actually leaving the authority. So I just wanted to say thank you to Rachel for supporting the committee, certainly during my time in the chair, and obviously before that as well. So Rachel, thank you very much. And I think from the committee, we wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, on that note, thank you very much to members, officers, and I'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you.